There is a single habit so ordinary, so embedded in your daily routine, that you would never suspect it of doing you harm. It is not a vice. It is not negligence. It is not some dark thought you entertain in moments of weakness. It is something your mother taught you, something your teachers praised you for, something the entire civilized world considers a mark of good character, and it is quietly dismantling every good thing trying to reach you. I realize that sounds extreme. I realize you are already constructing the argument against it in your mind. But I am asking you to hold that objection for just a little while, because what I am going to share with you in the next few minutes did not come from a motivational seminar or a bestseller written 3 years ago. It came from a lineage of study that stretches back further than most of the institutions you trust today. And it was handed to me not in a classroom, but in a kitchen in Krakow, by a man who had memorized entire tractates of the Talmud before he was 13 years old. My name is Elior. My great-uncle Zvulun was a scholar whose reputation in certain circles of Eastern European Jewry was matched only by his stubbornness and his extraordinary capacity for silence. He was not the kind of man who gave advice freely. He watched. He waited. He chose his words the way a surgeon chooses instruments, with deliberate economy, and only when necessary. When I was 23, freshly arrived in Krakow after a season of what I can only describe as spectacular failure, he sat me down at his kitchen table, placed a clay cup of tea in front of me, and said something I have never stopped turning over in my mind. He said, "The mouth that closes after receiving is the mouth that will receive nothing more." I thought I understood him. I did not. It would take me another 3 years, and a particular winter that I would rather not revisit in detail, before those words cracked fully open and showed me what was living inside them. Here is what Zevulun was pointing toward, and what I have spent decades since trying to articulate in a way that actually lands. In the tradition of Jewish mystical thought, and specifically in the framework that the Kabbalists call the structure of divine flow, the universe is not a vending machine. It is not a transaction. It is a river. A river does not stop and wait for you to say you've had enough water. A river flows. The only question is whether your vessel is positioned to receive what the river is already carrying toward you, or whether you have, through a subtle and almost invisible act of spiritual closure, turned yourself sideways and let it run past. Most people have been taught that gratitude is a conclusion. You receive something, a windfall, a kindness, a stroke of luck, and gratitude is the bow you tie on top. Ribbon down, box closed, interaction complete. The Kabbalists teach something almost violently different. They teach that gratitude is not a conclusion. Gratitude is an aperture. It is the act of widening the opening through which more can enter. Done correctly, it does not signal to the divine flow that you are satisfied and finished. It signals that you are aware, awake, oriented, and ready, and that your capacity to receive has just grown because of what you received. The vessel, as Zevulun used to say, does not fill. The vessel expands. When you say thank you as a period, flat, polite, final, you are telling the river that you are satisfied. And the river, which carries more than you can currently imagine, will simply move on, not out of punishment, not out of neglect, but because the spiritual laws governing abundance operate on the same logic as physical laws governing flow. Water does not force itself into a sealed container. Now let me tell you about the winter I mentioned. I was 26. I had spent 3 years studying in a small Beit Midrash in southern Poland, emerging with considerable theoretical knowledge and approximately no ability to translate any of it into actual material stability. I was sharing a 2-room apartment with a man named Favish, who collected broken clocks and never seemed to sleep. I had 40 days of savings left. I had been passed over for a teaching position I was certain I would receive. And I had, this is the part I am almost embarrassed to admit, been practicing gratitude daily. Every morning I wrote in a journal. I listed what I was thankful for. I felt the feelings. I did the ritual. I was, by any conventional measure, a devoted practitioner of the principles I claimed to believe in. And yet the situation kept contracting. It was Favish, of all people. Favish, who never slept and talked to his clocks as though they were colleagues, who pointed to what I was doing wrong. He watched me write in my journal one morning and then said, without looking up from a clock movement he was dismantling, "You give thanks like a man reading a receipt, not like a man opening a door. I put the pen down. He was right in a way I could not immediately articulate, but could feel immediately in my chest. Every expression of gratitude I had been offering was retrospective, backward-facing. I was cataloging what had already arrived and closing the accounting. I was, in the language Zebulun had once used and I had not truly absorbed, closing my mouth after receiving. That same day I changed the practice, not dramatically, not with ceremony. I simply added a direction to it. I stopped saying thank you for what was. I started saying thank you for what was still approaching. Within a week, a letter arrived from a teacher in Lodz who had heard of my work through a mutual acquaintance. Within 3 weeks, I had an invitation to give a series of talks that I had not applied for and had not sought. Within 2 months, the 40 days of savings I had counted out so grimly had been replaced by enough stability that I stopped counting. I do not offer this as proof of anything metaphysical. I offer it as the moment the teaching became real for me, not as inherited wisdom I respected from a distance, but as something I had tested and felt working in the structure of my own life. Let me give you the specific practice. This comes from a synthesis of teachings I have gathered across 3 decades of study, including texts from the school of Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, whose work on the structure of divine emanations forms one of the most precise maps of spiritual mechanics ever produced. You will need almost nothing: a quiet space, a few undisturbed minutes, and a willingness to mean what you say. The first element is water. In Kabbalistic cosmology, water corresponds to the sephira of Chesed, the quality of expansive, loving generosity, the kind that gives without calculation and flows without boundary. Keeping water present during this practice is not superstition. It is a reminder, held in physical form, that the quality you are trying to embody is one of infinite directional flow. Fill a glass, clear glass if you have one. Set it in front of you. The second element is something made of grain, a piece of bread, a cracker, something simple and elemental. In the Jewish tradition, bread carries the weight of an entire theology of material provision. The blessing over bread, the hamotzi, is considered a gateway blessing precisely because it acknowledges that what nourishes us in the physical world is a direct extension of divine generosity. Hold the bread in both hands. The third element is a flame, a candle, a match, anything that burns with intention. Light is not decorative here. In Kabbalistic understanding, the flame corresponds to the neshama, the level of soul that connects individual human consciousness to its divine source. When you light a flame in this practice, you are not performing theater. You are creating a point of correspondence between the world you can see and the flow you are trying to align with. Now the words. This is where most modern gratitude practices fail entirely. They use language that, however sincere, is structurally closed. Thank you for this. I am grateful for that. Subject, verb, object, sentence complete. Closure embedded in the grammar itself. The formulation I use, drawn from meditative traditions in the school of the Baal Shem Tov, deliberately refuses closure. It is constructed to remain open at its end, like a door held ajar. Say this, aloud, slowly, with the water before you, the bread in your hands, the flame lit. What has arrived is real, and I receive it fully. What has not yet arrived is also real, and I receive it fully. I am not at the end of what is being given to me. I am at the beginning of understanding how much is still coming. My receiving does not close when I acknowledge what I hold. My receiving opens further. Then drink from the water, slowly. The act of drinking in this context is an embodied statement. I am a vessel that takes in. I am not a sealed surface that accumulates and stops. Eat the bread, slowly. Chew it with full attention. This is not a meal. This is an acknowledgement, made in the language of the body, that provision is real, and that you are open to more of it than you currently have. Then sit. 2 minutes of silence, minimum. Not empty silence, directed silence. Use it to see what you want, not as a fantasy, but as a rightful destination. You are not fantasizing. You are positioning. There is a difference. Fantasy is passive. Positioning is active readiness. Then say before you leave the space, my acknowledgement is a beginning, not an ending. What I have received has made room for more, not drawn a line around less. The flow continues and I am in it. Blow out the candle. Watch the smoke rise. Let the practice be complete for that session, knowing that complete in this context means has landed and is continuing to unfold, not is finished. Now the warnings, and I mean this. Do not treat these as optional. The first warning is about emotional contamination. If you carry unresolved resentment into this practice, against a person who wronged you, against a situation that feels unjust, against yourself for past failures, the practice will not work. This is not a moral judgment. It is a structural reality. Resentment is, in the language of the Zohar, a constriction. It narrows the channel. You cannot simultaneously constrict and expand. Address what you carry before you bring it into this space. The second warning is about speech. What you do inside the practice can be undone outside it, with remarkable efficiency. If you spend the rest of the day narrating scarcity, complaining about what you lack, rehearsing your limitations, performing helplessness for sympathetic audiences, you will neutralize everything the practice set in motion. The Talmud's statement that life and death are in the power of the tongue is not poetry. It is an observation about spiritual mechanics. Your ongoing speech is either consistent with your practice or corrosive to it. There is no neutral ground. The third warning is about sharing too early. When a practice is new, it is like a young root. It needs stillness to establish itself. If you immediately broadcast what you are doing to people who will meet it with skepticism or mild mockery, even well-meaning affectionate mockery, you introduce interference into the signal before it has stabilized. Keep this between you and whatever you consider the source of all provision for at least a week. After that, share with those who will receive it with respect. I want to say something about why this matters with particular urgency at this moment. The world being navigated right now by ordinary people trying to build stable lives is not a generous landscape. Economic pressures that a previous generation would have found incomprehensible are simply accepted as background conditions. The feeling that the rules of accumulation and security have changed without anyone explaining the new rules, that feeling is accurate, not paranoid. Things have changed. But here is what has not changed, and what the Jewish communities that survived the most catastrophic circumstances in recorded history understood with a clarity that came from having no alternative. The spiritual laws governing abundance are not economic. They are not index-linked. They do not respond to inflation or volatility, or the decisions made in rooms you have no access to. They respond to the interior posture of the person engaging with them. That is simultaneously the most demanding truth and the most liberating one. It demands everything of you internally, but it places the mechanism of change within your reach, regardless of external circumstance. My ancestors maintained this understanding through conditions that make contemporary hardship look like mild inconvenience, not because they were immune to hardship, because they had a framework for engaging with reality that could not be confiscated, destroyed, or devalued. This practice is a small piece of that framework. It is not the whole of it. The whole of it is the work of a lifetime, but it is a genuine entry point. It is a place to begin orienting yourself differently. Zavulun lived to 91. In the last years of his life, when his body had become more memory than mass, and he could no longer travel, people still came to his kitchen table from considerable distances, not for miracles, for the thing he had that most people around them lacked, a settled, unshakable sense that there was more available than most people were currently positioned to receive. He used to say near the end, "The one who expects nothing and is grateful for nothing closes both doors. The one who expects everything and is grateful for everything keeps both doors open. But the one who learns to be grateful for what is arriving before it arrives, that one has no doors at all, only open space." I have spent 30 years trying to become the third kind of person. I am not fully there, but I am further than I was. And the distance I have traveled has almost entirely been covered not by effort in the conventional sense, but by learning, repeatedly, imperfectly, and with considerable backsliding, to say thank you like a door instead of a wall. Begin today. Say it like the beginning of something. Say it like you know there is more behind it. Say it like the river has not stopped running just because you acknowledge the water in your hands. Because it hasn't. It never does. The only question is whether you are still standing in it.